On Saturday at around 9:30 a.m. local time, the combined forces of the United States and Israel launched a coordinated strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran. Within the first 24 hours, more than 1,000 strikes were carried out against targets across the country, hitting command centers, military bases, and critical infrastructure. Dozens of Iran's political and military leaders were killed. On the very first day of the operation, code-named Epic Fury by the Americans and Roaring Lion by Israel, the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had ruled Iran since 1989, was killed in an Israeli airstrike. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu declared that their objective was regime change. For 47 years, the Iranian regime has been chanting "Death to America." That regime is about to learn that no one should ever question the strength and power of the United States Armed Forces, said US President Donald Trump. Both leaders also addressed the Iranian public directly, urging them to seize the moment, use the chaos, and overthrow the authorities of the Islamic Republic. But Iran is not backing down. In response to what it calls American-Israeli aggression, Tehran has launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones not only toward Israel, but also at US bases across the region. So far, 3 American soldiers have been killed, and 5 more wounded in these attacks. Donald Trump, who once condemned the endless wars waged by his predecessors in the Middle East, from Afghanistan and Iraq to Libya, has now launched a war of his own against Iran. Like those before him, Trump is betting on a short war and a decisive American victory. But the sands of the Middle East have misled more than one US president. Now let's examine the situation. As GTBT, we consistently strive to analyze the successive crises shaking our modern world, from Taiwan through Ukraine to Iran. In moments like these, I appreciate even more the partners who have been with us for years. One of them is XTB, our longtime partner, and an app I personally use every day. It is where I have been managing my investments for several years now, and I can recommend it with full confidence. With XTB, you get access to over 8,500 stocks and ETFs from around the world, including companies operating in strategic sectors such as energy, commodities, technology, and industry. Commission-free investing up to 100,000 euros in monthly turnover gives you greater flexibility to respond to market changes. Above that, 0.2% commission applies. So if you want to better understand how global events translate into market movements, you will find all details in the link below. Remember that every investing involves risk. The United States and Israel are conducting their campaign against Iran according to a clear division of roles. While the US military is focused primarily on degrading Iran's military capabilities, Israel has concentrated on decapitation strikes, targeted operations aimed at eliminating the Islamic Republic's political and military leadership. The Israel Defense Forces claim that on the very first day of the war alone, more than 40 senior Iranian officers were killed. Some of these deaths have already been confirmed by Tehran. What we know with certainty is that the following figures are no longer alive: Aziz Nasirzadeh, Iran's Minister of Defense; Ali Shamkhani, Senior Military Advisor to the Supreme Leader; Mohammad Pakpour, Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps; and Abdul Rahim Mousavi, Chief of Staff of Iran's Armed Forces. The most significant target Israel succeeded in eliminating, however, was Ayatollah Ali Khamenei himself, the supreme leader of Iran since 1989. The consequences of his death will be discussed shortly. Over the past several months, Israel, together with the United States, has effectively decapitated the top leadership of nearly every hostile organization in its regional network, from Hamas to Hezbollah and now the Islamic Republic itself. Israel's focus on political and military leadership should not come as a surprise. As both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have stated, the objective of the operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion is the collapse of the Islamic Republic. The American-Israeli strategy is built on a central assumption that once Iran's leadership is eliminated, a political vacuum will emerge, and that ordinary Iranians will step into that vacuum, rise up, and bring down what remains of the regime. In practice, however, this plan may prove extraordinarily difficult to execute. During last year's 12-day war, Prime Minister Netanyahu also called on Iranians to rise up, but the appeal produced no tangible results. Assuming that this time will be different is a bold bet, especially given that many Iranians may remember that anti-government protests earlier this year when Trump publicly expressed support, only to ultimately do nothing as Iranian authorities suppressed the unrest with brutality. So far, there are no signs that the American-Israeli appeal is having the intended effect. On the streets of Iranian cities, what we see instead are mourners, people gathering to grieve the death of Ayatollah Khamenei. At the same time, it must be said that our picture of events inside Iran remains incomplete. The government has imposed widespread internet restrictions, making it difficult to assess the full scale and direction of developments on the ground. Returning to the military dimension, the scale of the US-Israeli campaign is enormous. Israel has deployed around 200 fighter jets, making this the largest combat air operation in the country's history. The United States has committed a comparable number of aircraft supported by B-2 strategic bombers and Tomahawk cruise missiles. American aircraft are operating from two carrier strike groups, USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford, as well as from multiple military bases across the region. The strike package includes F-A-18s, F-16s, F-22s and F-35s, alongside MQ-9 Reaper drones and the low-cost Lucas unmanned system. The entire operation is backed by hundreds of additional platforms across air, naval, cyber and logistical domains. In Tehran, strikes have targeted the core institutions of state power, from the presidential compound to the ministries of defense and intelligence to the headquarters of Iran's general staff. Beyond the capital, major targets include Isfahan, home to a key nuclear complex, Parchin, a major explosives research facility, Qom, Kermanshah, Karash, and Ilam, and military installations across the country. Iran's navy appears to have suffered significant losses. President Trump stated that 9 warships were destroyed or sunk, including a Yamaran-class corvette that was docked in the port of Chabahar. One particularly important target was Karg Island, the hub through which roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports pass. The island was struck, although the full extent of the damage remains unclear. Although the Americans and Israelis would prefer to write off the Islamic Republic, the latter is not giving up without a fight. Roughly 1 hour after the opening wave of US-Israeli strikes, Iranian forces launched retaliatory operations. Such a rapid response was possible because Tehran had recently loosened its rules of engagement, granting field commanders broad autonomy in the event that contact with Central Command was lost. Iran named its operation True Promise 4. Tehran is firing ballistic missiles and launching drones not only at Israel, but also at US military installations across the region. The most intense attacks are targeting American bases on the opposite shore of the Persian Gulf, in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. But Iranian strikes across the Gulf are not limited to military targets. Civilian infrastructure has also been hit, including airports and luxury hotels popular with foreign visitors. Among the reported targets were the Fairmont The Palm Hotel in Dubai and Kuwait International Airport. Strikes were even carried out in Oman, a country that has traditionally maintained close ties with Iran, and whose diplomats were still attempting to mediate between Washington and Tehran just days ago. The heaviest barrage has been directed at the United Arab Emirates. As of the end of March 1st, Iran has launched approximately 165 ballistic missiles and 541 drones toward Emirati territory. For the UAE, the attack represents a major reputational shock. Dubai's international airport the world's busiest for international passengers, was temporarily shut down. Emirati officials insist, however, that their air defense network, built around Patriot, Skynet, Barak systems, and even Russian-made Pantsir units, achieved an interception rate exceeding 90%. Still, a number of missiles and drones managed to get through. Iran's attacks on Arab states are part of a broader strategic calculation. Tehran is betting that the Gulf monarchies, facing direct economic and security risks, will pressure Donald Trump to end the war. But it is a dangerous gamble, one that could easily spiral beyond Iran's control. The strategy rests on the assumption that Arab governments will avoid direct retaliation, unwilling to be seen as fighting on Israel's side. That assumption may prove partly correct, but the situation is more complicated. The United Arab Emirates has normalized relations with Israel and maintains close political and security cooperation. Even if the Gulf Cooperation Council does not coordinate a collective response, the possibility cannot be ruled out that the UAE may act independently. In fact, the Emirates have already announced the closure of their embassy in Tehran and begun evacuating diplomatic personnel from Iran. Meanwhile, the conflict is spilling beyond Iran and Israel, drawing more actors across the Middle East into the fight. On the first day of the operation, US or Israeli forces struck a base belonging to pro-Iranian militias in Iraq. In response, Kataib Hezbollah launched attacks on American military installations. Other members of Iran's regional network have also entered the conflict. Lebanon's Hezbollah has begun shelling northern Israel, while Yemen's Houthi movement has announced the resumption of attacks on commercial shipping passing through the Bab al-Mandab Strait, a critical choke point linking the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. Tensions are also rising in the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil consumption flows. On the first day of the war, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps broadcast a radio warning ordering ships not to transit the strait. The following day, a tanker named Skylight, sailing under the flag of Palau, was attacked. However, the vessel reportedly belonged to the so-called Shadow Fleet, used to smuggle Iranian oil in violation of sanctions. This raises the possibility that Tehran deliberately used the Skylight, effectively one of its own vessels, to stage a controlled show of force. Although Iran's foreign minister later stated that Tehran does not intend to close the Strait of Hormuz, the signal has already had a powerful effect. A significant number of tankers have chosen to avoid the passage altogether and are now waiting offshore near the coast of the United Arab Emirates and Oman, an early indication that even limited disruption could have global economic consequences. The Islamic Republic of Iran is both fighting and mourning. On the morning of March 1st, state television officially confirmed the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The announcement marked the beginning of a 40-day national mourning period, but also the start of a sensitive and potentially destabilizing transfer of power. Khamenei was 86 years old. Iran's political and military leadership had been long aware that the supreme leader's time was near its end, but his sudden and violent death came as a shock to the establishment. Under Iran's constitution, until a new supreme leader is selected, authority is to be exercised by a three-member interim council, composed of President Masoud Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Gholam Hossein Mohseni, and Ali Reza Arafi, representing the Guardian Council. The new supreme leader will be chosen by the Assembly of Experts, an 88-member clerical body. In principle, the selection should take place as quickly as possible. In practice, however, wartime conditions may significantly delay the process. Convening all 88 members could prove difficult, and gathering them in a single location would carry obvious security risks. For that reason, it is increasingly likely that Ali Larijani, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, will play a major, though informal role in managing the state during his transitional period. The council he oversees is Iran's key body for shaping national security and foreign policy. Notably, it was Larijani, not President Pezeshkian, who appeared on state television to explain the succession process and the temporary management of the country. Even more striking, reports had circulated roughly 2 weeks before the attack that Ayatollah Khamenei had privately indicated that in the event of his death, Larijani should assume de facto leadership until a new supreme leader is chosen. If true, that would make Larijani not just a caretaker figure, but the central power broker in Iran at the moment of war, uncertainty, and potential internal fragmentation. Who will become the next supreme leader remains a major unknown. Speculation about potential successors has been circulating for years, and a wide range of names has appeared in the process. Among those mentioned are Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late supreme leader, Hassan Khomeini, the grandson of the founder of the Islamic Republic, and Sadiq Larijani, the brother of Ali Larijani. There is no shortage of potential candidates. At the same time, pointing to any specific individual at this stage would be pure speculation. What does seem unlikely, however, is a succession within a single family, whether the Khamenei or the Khomeini line. After all, the Islamic Republic was founded in opposition to the hereditary rule of the Shah, and the position of supreme leader was never intended to function as a dynastic office. Staying with the question of succession, it is also worth noting that in previous years there had been repeated claims that the issue had already been settled behind the scenes, that a future supreme leader had been informally designated. However, there has never been strong evidence to support those claims. The greatest uncertainty in the current confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States may be President Donald Trump himself. When announcing the launch of Operation Epic Fury, Trump declared that his objective was the overthrow of the Islamic Republic and called on Iranians to rise up and fight for their freedom. Yet just hours later, once it became clear that Ayatollah Khamenei was dead, his tone shifted significantly. Speaking to reporters, Trump said that the supreme leader's death could actually make a diplomatic agreement with Tehran easier to achieve. How do these two statements fit together? And where is the logic? The key is to distinguish between the objectives Israel is pursuing in Iran and those of President Trump. Israel appears determined to bring about the collapse of the Islamic Republic. In Trump's case, the same level of determination is far less evident. The president seems ready at any moment to step back from the goal of regime change if the costs of war begin to rise too high, particularly if the conflict triggers a sharp increase in global oil prices. Trump himself made this clear in comments to Axios shortly after the attack. "I can keep going to take over all of Iran, or I can end it in 2 or 3 days and tell the Iranians, see you in a few years, if you start rebuilding your nuclear and missile programs." The statement suggests that Trump remains open to a negotiated settlement with Tehran. For Israel, this creates a major strategic complication. Why would Iranians respond to Trump's call to rise up against the Islamic Republic if their potential American backer, who only hours earlier was talking about regime change, is now signaling a willingness to negotiate with the very same regime? Even if President Trump decides to step back from the war with Iran, it is reasonable to assume that Israel will do everything possible to prevent an early end to the conflict. Why? Because Iran has already survived one round of that fight, and Benjamin Netanyahu will want to make sure that this time is different. The reference here obviously points to 12-day conflict of the last year, known as Operation Rising Lion. At the time, Israel exposed significant internal weaknesses within Iran and even managed to draw the United States into the operation. But the final results were limited. No internal uprising followed, and Iran's nuclear program was not fully destroyed. Now Israel may see a second chance to dismantle the Islamic Republic, and one it will be determined to use. Opportunities like this do not come often, especially given the rapidly changing attitudes of younger Americans toward Israel. Netanyahu may assume that political conditions in Washington could become less favorable in the future. At the same time, a critical question remains: could material constraints derail Israeli plans? The US-Israeli strategy is built on the assumption that sustained air and naval strikes will trigger internal unrest inside Iran. But what if no uprising occurs? What options would remain then? A ground invasion appears highly unlikely. Trump has consistently opposed the idea of putting boots on the ground, and American public opinion shows little appetite for another large-scale Middle Eastern war. That would leave a prolonged campaign conducted from the air and sea. The question then becomes, how long can the United States and Israel sustain such a war? Before the attack on Iran, leaks in the American press suggested internal concerns. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was reportedly advising the president against a prolonged confrontation, warning that US missile defense stocks might be insufficient to counter sustained Iranian ballistic missiles. According to one newspaper report citing a military assessment, US forces estimated that interceptor inventories would be sufficient for only about 2 weeks of high-intensity conflict, unless Iran exhausted its own missile arsenal first. Concerns about limited stockpiles may already have influenced US decision-making elsewhere. Similar material constraints were reportedly one of the factors behind Washington's earlier decision to scale back Operation Rough Rider, the campaign against Yemen's Houthi forces. And so, the Islamic Republic understands that its very survival is now at stake. Cornered, it is likely to fight with even greater determination. The United States and Israel are betting that the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei marks a decisive turning point, one that will trigger the collapse of the current system and the fall of the Republic. Without downplaying the significance of Khamenei's death, however, there is one fundamental issue worth noting. In recent years, Khamenei's foreign policy had been deeply ineffective. The road to the current crisis began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel, setting off a broader confrontation between Israel and Iran's regional network. It was a confrontation that Khamenei struggled to manage, losing allies one by one. The head of Hamas's political bureau was killed by Israel while visiting Tehran. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah died in an Israeli strike in Beirut, and Syria's president was driven from power after a rapid rebel offensive. Throughout the confrontation with Israel, Iran largely remained passive and reactive, repeatedly exposing its own limitations. To some extent, this reflected Khamenei's personal leadership style. He was by nature a cautious and conservative decision-maker. That caution was visible not only in Iran's regional strategy after 2023, but also in the nuclear program itself. While Iran steadily advanced its capabilities, Khamenei never gave political approval for the actual construction of a nuclear bomb, despite pressure from part of the Iranian political establishment. If the Islamic Republic ultimately survives the current test, and that outcome is not that unlikely, the country's new political and military leadership may prove far less restrained. Paradoxically, this conflict could produce a more militarized Iran, one even more determined to acquire nuclear weapons, which would be then seen as the only reliable guarantee against future US or Israeli attacks.